So to the abuser, who is abusing is not very important. The act of abuse is important. The act of abuse gives the abuser comfort, because when he abuses, he feels that he's in control. He feels he will not be abandoned. He feels his anxiety is going down. It is the act of abuse, not the target of the abuse, that is important. Today I abuse you, tomorrow I abuse someone else. It doesn't matter. I just need to abuse. It's like making money, you know? You can make money from one business, and then the next day you can make money from another business. It's not the business that matters. It's the process of making money. It's the same with abuse. So it's codependency is a very misleading term, which is why, by the way, we never use it in clinical settings or academia. I'm a professor. I never use this phrase because it implies reciprocity, codependency, like both parties are dependent, which is very misleading, because in majority of dependency situations, only one party is dependent. In trauma bonding, only the abused party loves the abuser. The abuser has no emotions, no attachment, nothing towards the abused. He just uses her. He uses her as a punching bag. You know, he punches her, that's all. He needs to abuse. Now, if I'm an abuser, I need to abuse. You happen to be there. Bad for you. Your problem. You happen to be there. If you move away and another woman enters the frame, I will abuse her. No problem. I just need to abuse. Abuse is a power play. It's a control strategy. It has very little to do with the target of abuse. Now, the targets of abuse, they want to feel special. They want to feel unique because they have their own grandiose narcissistic defenses. And they want to make sense of what happened. They want what happened to have meaning. They want the abuse to make some sense. So they say, I'm being abused because I'm highly empathic. I'm being abused because I'm kind. I've been abused because I'm a nice person. I've been chosen to be abused. I haven't been abused randomly. I haven't been abused accidentally. I've been abused because I've been chosen. They want to convince themselves that what happened makes sense. But here's the breaking news. Abuse doesn't make sense. And the abuse victims are not chosen. They just happen to be there conveniently. There is no commonality. There is no typology of abuse victims. We have a we have a field called victimology. And in victimology, we study profiles of victims. And when it comes to abuse in intimate relationships, there is no typical profile. Everyone can be abused. Anyone can be abused. Empathic and non-empathic. Good people and bad people. Anyone can end up being a victim of abuse. So you're not special as a victim of abuse. You've not been chosen. You just happen to be there. That is very difficult to hear because it means that the abuse was random, accidental, meaningless, senseless. And so your life was ruined by an accidental occurrence, by some random event, and you can't digest this. You can't digest this because you attribute to the abuser humanity. But when the abuser abuses, he is not human in any sense I'm aware of. For example, we have demonstrated that during episodes of abuse, there is a total lack of empathy, even when the abuser is otherwise empathic. So when the abuse happens, exactly during the abuse, he's totally disympathetic. He's also self-centered. He becomes highly grandiose and self-centered during the episodes of abuse. It is another very interesting observation that is a bit underanalyzed. Abusers are like multiple personality. They have one personality when they are not abusing, and a totally different personality when they're abusing, which makes it impossible for the victim to comprehend what happened. Just, I can't believe that he did this. Otherwise, when he's not abusive, he's a wonderful man. He's loving, he's caring, he's supportive, he gave me everything. And then he broke my arm, or destroyed me verbally, and I can't put the two together. It's like two personalities. And yes, she's right. There are self-states, what I call self-states. There are self-states. The abuser, when he abuses, is not the same person as the abuser when he is not abused. And that's very, very difficult to comprehend and accept. Because you see, if you're a victim and you need to give up on the abuser, you need to break up, you need to walk away, you're giving up also on the good personality. You're not giving up only on the bad personality. It's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mm-hmm. If you give up on Mr. Hyde, you're also giving up on Dr. Jekyll. When you give up on the abuser, you also give up on a wonderful man. Because there are periods when he's a wonderful man, and there are periods when he's a monster. You give up on the monster, you give up on the wonderful man also. It's a package deal. Can you do that? Many victims can't. They say, okay, he's a monster sometimes, but he's also the most wonderful man I ever met. And I'm not willing to give up on this. I'm willing to pay the price to be with the monster every 3 weeks,
Yeah.
Shame and guilt, ego incongruent emotions. Shame and guilt, on the one hand, indicate facing reality, which is always good. But on the other hand, they can indicate an attempt to take responsibility for what happened, to feel responsible, to feel guilty for what happened, to feel ashamed because you could have behaved differently or you could have made different choices or so. And this I don't encourage in my clients. Because I tell them, when you take responsibility for what had happened, you're trying to reassume control. You're trying to say, my abuse was my fault. I controlled it. I could have prevented it. I'm ashamed and guilty and responsible because I did not prevent it. But the truth is you couldn't. On the one hand, you must accept reality. You must face reality. But on the other hand, you must realize that there was sometimes very little that you could have done. And in most cases, you're not responsible and you're not guilty and you're not to be ashamed. And most people would have behaved identically to you. So I don't encourage shame and guilt because these are disguised attempts to assume control of a situation which was actually out of control. It's another way of avoiding reality. In effect, it's saying, yes, I have been abused. I accept reality. I've been abused, but it was my fault. I controlled it, which is another way of avoiding reality, because in reality, the victim has no control or very little control. The only thing the victim can do profitably is walk away. If absent this, if the victim stays in the relationship, there's extremely little the victim can do. So that's where there's a thin line between shame, guilt, responsibility, accountability, saying, yeah, I contributed to this situation by, for example, making bad choices. Okay, but up to a point. Beyond that point, it's falsifying reality. It's saying, I provoked him. I was in control. Or I chose the wrong partner. I could have not chosen this partner. Or I. It's all I. It's like I was the god in the situation, which is wrong.
So a reason that people tend to do that, to take that control back, is because they struggle so much to really accept what happened and grieve the loss of the illusion, of the hope, everything.
It's multiple grief. It's multiple grief. First of all, they grieve their own helplessness. There's a lot of shame in helplessness. Even if it is justified and objective and could not have been avoided, there's still a lot of shame. They grieve the fantasy that is lost. They grieve themselves because they have been changed irreversibly, and they've been damaged. They grieve this. They grieve what could have been, the dream. They grieve the abuser. There's a lot of grief about the abuser. They still see the good sides of the abuser, the child in the abuser. They still love the abuser or believe that they love the abuser. And so there's a lot of grieving over the abuser and the abuser's wasted potential. Not only the abuser is a lost intimate partner, but what the abuser could have been had he not been an abuser. There is grief about lost time and opportunities, lost social connections, lost family, losses. So the grief, this is the most profound form of grief. When you exit a trauma-bonded relationship, it's by far the most profound form of grief. If you lose a child, you grieve the child, you grieve the child's lost potential, you grieve your love for the child, etc., etc. But this is limited grief. When you lose the fantasy that was the trauma bonding, you lose your entire universe, past, present, and future. Because in your mind, the trauma-bonded relationship was a fantasy about to happen in a process of becoming, and it will never ever happen. It's also a huge loss. And you lose yourself. You're no longer you. Sometimes you don't recognize yourself. So you lost yourself as well. And you lost the person you loved. Your abuser. So there's a cognitive dissonance here. How can I mourn or grieve someone who had abused me? Is something wrong with me? Is something wrong with my appraisal of the situation? Because now I don't trust myself. I don't trust my judgment. I don't trust my reality testing. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he was not an abuser. Maybe he didn't abuse me. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I provoked him. Maybe. So there's a lot of maybes, It's extremely disorienting, extremely. And profound. And it's called, by the way, in the DSM, the text revision that was published a few weeks ago, they put finally the prolonged grief syndrome. Finally, it's there officially. And I think victims of trauma bonding, they undergo prolonged grief syndrome, not regular grief, prolonged grief.